This is a Fox News alert. I'm John Scott in New York. Arizona Senator and war hero John McCain has died at the age of 81. McCain's death comes shortly after it was revealed that he was no longer seeking treatment for the brain cancer, which was diagnosed in July of last year. The tumor was discovered during surgery to remove a blood clot. McCain was born August 29, 1936, at the Coco Solo Naval Station in Panama, a U.S. territory at the time. That became an issue during the 2008 campaign because he had not been born within the contiguous United States. He was the grandson of a four-star admiral, and the son of a four-star admiral. McCain himself graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland in 1958, and then flight school in 1960. At the beginning of the Vietnam War, John McCain volunteered for combat duty. And in 1967, during a bombing run, his plane was shot down. He landed in a lake, was captured, and held as a prisoner of war until 1973. For his service, McCain was awarded the Civil Star, the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and the Distinguished Flying Cross. After his release, he served as a Republican congressman, then later a senator from the state of Arizona. McCain ran for president for the first time in the year 2000, but lost a heated primary to former President George W. Bush. He eventually secured the nomination in 2008 as George W. Bush was leaving the White House, but lost the general election to former President Barack Obama. Correspondent Mike Emanuel now takes a look at the life and times of John McCain.
John Sidney McCain III was born in 1936 at a naval air station in the Panama Canal Zone. McCain's father and grandfather were both four-star admirals. The family moved often between bases on the mainland and abroad. It was inevitable he would pursue a Navy career, and Ensign McCain graduated from the Naval Academy in Annapolis in 1958. As war broke out in Vietnam, McCain volunteered for duty. He flew attack planes against the North Vietnamese and escaped serious injury in June 1967 when a rocket aboard the aircraft carrier USS Forrestal accidentally struck McCain's plane. Explosions and fires killed 134 people.
I felt this tremendous blow to my airplane and saw the fire coming out, so I probably had reacted a little more quickly than those in the planes near me. Some of those in the planes near me didn't survive.
On his 23rd air mission on October 26, 1967, his plane was shot down, this time during a bombing mission over Hanoi. The North Vietnamese captured him and moved him to the infamous Hanoi Hilton prison.
He was terribly injured, fractured arms, broken knee, left arm was out of the socket. He had not been fed, and basically he was starving to death.
McCain's captors offered him early release because he was an admiral's son, but he refused. He endured torture and more than 3 years in solitary confinement. He said Air Force Colonel Day saved his life.
Bud Day was the most steadfast, the most inspirational, and the toughest of anybody that I must have something to do with his Iowa upbringing.
McCain was released in 1973 and awarded Silver and Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart, and the Distinguished Flying Cross. His wounds left him with impaired physical abilities for the rest of his life. He retired from the Navy as a captain in 1981 after marrying Cindy Hensley, a teacher from Arizona. He moved to Phoenix and got into politics, serving 2 terms in the House of Representatives. He was elected to the Senate in 1986, where he developed a reputation as a maverick. While he voted with his party most of the time, it became clear he was willing to buck Republican leadership and occasionally align with Democrats. McCain's political career hit a bump in 1989 when he and 4 other senators, the Keating Five, were implicated in a savings and loan scandal and accused of corruption. A Senate Ethics Committee investigation found that though McCain used poor judgment, he was not guilty of any wrongdoing. McCain said that experience inspired him to co-author the McCain-Feingold bill on campaign finance reform with Wisconsin Senator Russ Feingold, which finally passed in 2001. And as chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee, he took on the tobacco industry with legislation to increase cigarette taxes. McCain published a memoir, Faith of My Fathers, in 1999. It became a bestseller and later a film. In the meantime, he announced his candidacy for president, appealing to independents and traveling aboard the Straight Talk Express. But after defeat in South Carolina, Texas Governor George W. Bush gained momentum, and McCain went on to lose 9 of 13 primaries on Super Tuesday. He withdrew from the race in March 2000, returning to the Senate. The senator threw his support behind President Bush and the Iraq War, but he later criticized the Bush administration for not sending enough troops to Iraq. He became the first Republican senator to demand Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld's resignation.
We're in one heck of a mess in Iraq. And the American people told us loud and clear last week that they're not happy. They're not happy with the course of this war. Neither am I.
He also continued to partner with his colleagues on the other side of the aisle. McCain and Democratic Senator Ted Kennedy made a push for comprehensive immigration reform, though the legislation failed to pass both houses. With President Bush's second term coming to a close, McCain again announced his candidacy for president.
I do so grateful for the privilege this country has already given me, mindful that I must seek this responsibilities for reasons greater than my self-interest.
This time, McCain won the majority of delegates on Super Tuesday, and then in the March 4th primaries, giving him the lead he needed to secure the nomination. McCain's surprise vice presidential pick was Alaska Governor Sarah Palin. Together, the two surged ahead of Democratic candidate and Illinois Senator Barack Obama and VP candidate Joe Biden in the polls following the Republican National Convention. But Obama gained momentum and ultimately defeated McCain in the general election.
These are difficult times for our country. And I pledge to him tonight to do all in my power to help him lead us through the many challenges we face.
As ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, McCain remained active on foreign policy. He rallied for military intervention in Libya against Muammar Gaddafi, pushed for democratic reforms in Egypt, and called for withholding U.S. aid to the Egyptian army after it ousted President Mohamed Morsi and his Muslim Brotherhood party. He also publicly criticized the Obama administration for its handling of the September 11, 2012 attack on the U.S. diplomatic mission in Benghazi that killed 4 Americans, including Ambassador Chris Stevens.
Have no doubt, we are holding the President of the United States responsible, and he is responsible, and he has given contrasting versions of events to the American people.
In 2015, McCain became chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee and used the platform to push for an expanded U.S. military presence in Iraq and Syria and a new strategy in Afghanistan.
We need to have a strategy to win. The strongest nation on earth should be able to win.
As the 2016 presidential election candidates began to emerge and he campaigned for his own Senate re-election, McCain pledged to support the eventual Republican nominee. He later pulled his endorsement of Donald Trump, citing their differences on public policy issues like national security and Trump's controversial comments about women. Then, in the midst of his 6th Senate term, he underwent surgery to remove a blood clot above his left eye and was later diagnosed with an aggressive brain tumor. Despite a poor cancer prognosis, he remained a dominant voice in the Senate, at times going against his own party's efforts to repeal and replace Obamacare. In July 2017, some senators audibly gasped as Arizona Senator gave a memorable thumbs-down gesture on the floor. McCain cast the deciding no vote, which killed the GOP's health care measure. All this as McCain released another memoir in his final days, The Restless Wave, a brutally honest assessment of his highs and lows, personal and professional. The Maverick senator offered this candid assessment, writing, "I'm not sure what to make of President Trump's convictions. His reaction to unflattering news stories, calling them fake news, whether they're credible or not, is copied by autocrats who want to discredit and control a free press. Flattery secures his friendship, criticism his enmity." In an audiobook excerpt, the man who made public service his life's passion reflected on what he considered his unfinished legacy.
Maybe I'll be gone before you hear this. My predicament is, well, rather unpredictable. But I'm prepared for either contingency, or at least I'm getting prepared. I have some things I'd like to take care of first, some work that needs finishing, and some people I need to see. And I want to talk to my fellow Americans a little more, if I may.
John McCain is survived by his wife Cindy and 7 children. In Washington, Mike Emanuel, Fox News.
We mentioned that John McCain was shot down over Vietnam. He was a prisoner of war, spent 5.5 years in the Hanoi Hilton. Chad Pergram is our senior Capitol Hill producer. He joins us now from Washington. You said that the Senate will drape a black cloth over Senator McCain's seat in the Senate. Anything else we know about arrangements there?
Right. Well, one thing we've been hearing, and we haven't had something like this in several years, but we expect him to lay in state in the Capitol Rotunda. Now, we have people who lay in state and lay in honor. Only 3 persons have lain in honor. That's one step below Billy Graham, the most recent. That was last year after he passed away, earlier this year, I should say. But sometime probably in the next week or so, we've been hearing that there will be services in multiple places. That's a big deal. The last person to lay in state was Daniel Inouye, the Democratic senator from Hawaii who died in December 2012. So we will have that big ceremony here where people can file in. They bring up what they call the catafalque, which is a fancy word for a big wooden platform which they used for President Lincoln's funeral, and they position the casket right in the middle of the Capitol Rotunda. There's some formal ceremonies typically, and then the public can file by. There's an honor guard that keeps watch over the body 24/7. There haven't been a lot of people besides presidents who have lain in state in the Capitol, but that's something, a very public thing that people can come to, and you can get in line and go into the Capitol and pay your respects to Senator McCain, and we would expect that sometime in the next few days. And also, the Senate will come back at 4 o'clock on Monday afternoon. A lot of senators don't jet back in until right before votes. There's going to be votes at 5:30. But I would expect, most of the focus is not going to be on legislative business. A lot of it's going to be on John McCain, what happens next, honoring him. And some people will start to talk about the political considerations. People were very reluctant. It was almost a taboo subject to talk about what happens with John McCain next. Arizona law requires the governor to appoint someone of the same political party, and this is very important from the political calculus because it was 51-49 in favor of the Republicans with McCain being there, so they barely could lose a vote. That's why that vote that Mike Emanuel talked about in his report was so important. They couldn't lose John McCain's vote on health care. So that person will be appointed through 2020. Now, McCain was just reelected in 2016. His term doesn't expire until 2022, but the way Arizona state law functions, whoever is appointed by Arizona Governor Doug Ducey would serve until 2020, and then that person would run in a special election to fulfill the unexpired portion, the final 2 years in 2022.
I'm reading something that John McCain gave to U.S. News and World Report back in 1973 after he returned from his captivity and after the Vietnam War was over. It was his first-person account, and it talks about how the seeds of his political career may have been planted while he was in the Hanoi Hilton. It says the most important thing for survival is communication with someone. It's vital to keep your mind occupied. Some guys were interested in mathematics, so they worked out complex formulas in their heads. Others would build a whole house from basement on up. I have more of a philosophical bent. I had read a lot of history, spent days on end going back over those history books in my mind, figuring out where this country or that country went wrong, what the U.S. should do in the area of foreign affairs. I thought a lot about the meaning of life. And, perhaps that's why we ended up with a Senator, John McCain, because although he was tortured and suffered severely in the Hanoi Hilton, Chad, he had a lot of time to think.
Right, absolutely. And that's why, I remember a few years ago they were working on this veterans reform bill. They've passed another piece of legislation dealing with that. But, he was, front and center and very frustrated that people were being sent off to war and there weren't the appropriate mechanisms here in Washington with the Department of Veterans Affairs to address that. A lot of this, stemmed from the VA scandal in his home state of Arizona. But I want to, tell people that there was a very light side of John McCain also. I remember, there was this story about how he lived in Northern Virginia, just across the river here, across the Potomac River, and he was seen shopping, pushing his own grocery cart at Shoppers Food Warehouse in a strip mall that's just across the river. I remember standing outside the Russell Senate office building a few years ago, and he was getting into his car, and there was a dent in his car, and I was joking with him. I said, really? The guy that ran for president, this is the car you drive? And he was talking about how he had this fender bender or somebody had run into his car. And so in that respect, he was just kind of an average guy. But, you know, he would joke with the press. He would kind of, as Ed Henry said earlier, would like to kind of spar with you and go back and forth. But he could be pretty tough as well.
Chad Pergram, our Capitol Hill producer, who has known John McCain for, well, a couple of decades there in Washington. Thanks, Chad.
Thank you.
Alicia Acuna joins us now. She is in Phoenix, Arizona, outside the Arizona State House. Alicia?
Hi, John. Kind of a sign that this was so expected is that things started to move in pretty quick fashion after Senator John McCain left this earth. We saw the flags behind me here at the Capitol building in Arizona be lowered to half staff. The POW flag went down first, and it was down there on its own for a little while, and then we saw it followed by the American flag and then the Arizona flag, and then we started to get the outpouring of love and prayers for his family, for his family that is now in mourning, of course. We heard from Cindy McCain, his wife of 38 years, who said, "My heart is broken. I am so lucky to have lived the adventure of loving this incredible man for 38 years. He passed the way he lived on his own terms, surrounded by the people he loved, in the place he loved best." And that would be at the ranch in Arizona, northern Arizona. That is in Cornville, Arizona, just south of Sedona. This is a place that meant so much to him, his favorite place on earth. As he liked to say, his family, as those who knew him best. He started staying there. He was there permanently starting in December. His last vote in the Senate was December 7th. His health started to weaken at that point, and he came back to Arizona, and he stayed in the place where he liked to barbecue, where he liked to enjoy the water that he has there on his property and be with the people who he loves. And over the months, he did welcome a lot of friends and family. And in terms of the response from the people here in Arizona, there's kind of a theme here, if you'll bear with me. Governor Doug Ducey, in a statement, said, "As we mourn his passing and celebrate his truly phenomenal life, we're also faced with the void John McCain's absence leaves in the heart and soul of our nation." And then also Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona, he wrote a tribute in the Washington Post, and he said, "I couldn't bring myself to write this piece until today. It's not that I didn't try, but something in my mind convinced my hands that if I put it off, somehow John McCain might be with us a little longer. I needed that. The country needed that." And that really speaks to the image and the presence that John McCain had. There was one political analyst who we talked to about the legacy of John McCain, and he said there isn't a politician, anyone in politics who is alive now, who can remember a time when John McCain was not in politics in Arizona. And John, as you know, he made his mark here in 1982 when he decided to run for the House of Representatives that first time. And this is a way that Arizona's really got to know who they were getting. John McCain, the candidate, was in a debate at the time with a Democrat who was also in the race, who was really trying to paint John McCain as this carpetbagger, this outsider, because, you know, he wasn't from here. He was a military guy, and so he lived all over the place. And so he kind of challenged him on that. And John McCain came back saying, well, if I ran for office in the place that I'd lived the longest, I would have to run in Hanoi, because 5.5 years in Hanoi in that POW camp was the longest place he had ever been before he made Arizona his home. John?
He broke both arms and his leg during the shoot down and was tortured severely by the North Vietnamese. And yet, as I mentioned a bit earlier, he was one of those who voted in favor of dropping the embargo against North Vietnam back in the 1990s. Forgive and forget, that seemed to be his attitude. Our special coverage on the passing of Senator John McCain will continue in just a moment.